Welcome, Nick.
Hello, Brinsley.
Yeah, the second hello, because we've done our little patois in the green room beforehand.
Mhm.
Before we get started, I feel like I need to address the background, because most people are used to seeing me with my other background, but we've moved the office into my daughter's room as we're moving at the end of this month. So anyone wondering why this random background's here, that's why.
It's nice. Nice yellow, summery yellow. Excellent.
It's great, isn't it? Yeah, it's handpicked, color matched out of an Indian piece of tribal art. So yeah, my daughter loves it.
Great.
Well, I don't want to make this interview too much about me, but that might be my shadow coming up, and we can get into shadow work later, can't we?
Great. Yeah.
So before we crack on with that, let's do an intro. From my side, I'm really, really curious to get to know a little bit more about you. And I know that you're keen on shadow work, men's work, working with dads. So I think there's a lot of crossover in terms of our interests and passions. So I really, really want to get into that today. And in preparation for the interview, I was listening to your TEDx, which was really, really moving. I had to do a bit of breath work before we came into the call because being a dad myself, I was really choked up actually towards the end. I loved it. So yeah, would love to get into all of that. But before we do, let's do an intro. What I know about you is that you're a writer, TEDx speaker, you're a trainer for Animas, a coach, and a supervisor. Would you add anything into that?
No, that just about covers it, I think. Yeah. Thanks, Brinsley. Yeah.
And if you were to introduce yourself as a coach, who would you say you are as a coach?
Oh my God. I'm a coach who's really comfortable with drift and lostness and stuckness in my clients. I love that stuff. So I'm probably the other end of the spectrum from kind of performance goal oriented stuff, although I'm very easy with that as well. But yeah, I'm fascinated by what makes us drift and how we can drift intentionally. And and I'm very interested in the sort of whole person. So you could say I'm kind of integrative, maybe existential. I love what the meaning of life might be, and that's kind of why I'm a coach. This has always fascinated me, like what meaning we make out of our experience. And I think I'm quite playful as well. I mean, I enjoy coaching people, and I love people, and yeah, that's how I introduce myself. But I've never done it like that before, so thanks for asking.
You're welcome. And I got some of those themes off your bio as well, the playfulness and the existential themes and the navigation, the drift, of course, which is kind of quite big topics when it comes to your books. And we had a brief chat before, and you said your coaching company nearly got called, was it Red Flag Sailing?
Oh yeah, red sail coaching. Yeah, I'm still toying with this kind of, do I need to change things and kind of put myself under an umbrella? But actually, like my whole career journalistically, which I guess we'll come on to, has been about navigating either literally or metaphorically. And in the end, I've left my site as it is because I love my website that I had when I was a writer and added the coaching in, and it sort of blends in quite well, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. Yeah, and it's a really impressive CV you've got there, which I'm sure supports you in building the coaching business. And there's lots of transferable skills you're bringing from all those areas to I guess, be an integrative practitioner.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, probably what will become apparent is I've never really sat down and consciously done that whole kind of what kind of a business do I want to build. So I've kind of done a bit of conscious drift in that as well, which, you know, sometimes I feel a bit ashamed of that. I think, Nick, you should have done that whole business plan thing. But even calling it a business is kind of new to me. So I'm really eager to hear from other people, and I'm sure I'm not the only one that's kind of not so hot on the social media. Like I just learned what a funnel is, like last week, for example. I've been doing this 6 years, so that stuff is not my strong point, but it hasn't stopped me getting clients, and you know, I'm open to learning more about that. But we'll see if I need to or not. I think maybe I do, but yeah, you can put me right on that, Princey.
Well, thanks for bringing me back on topic because we're going to be talking about the business building journey and what that's been like for you, as well as a few tangents on the way around who you are as a coach. Before we get into that navigation and drift piece, I was looking at, I watched your TEDx, I listened to a podcast of yours, And I kind of want to cover some new ground as well, some new navigation, go to places we've not been before, in
Yeah.
conversation. What's the one thing that I should know about you that would improve our relationship?
Wow, what a great question. Um, yeah, I think success for me is all around deep connection, going deep. So I'm really up for that stuff. Yeah, that really sets me on fire. So don't know if that's useful.
It is indeed. And I guess that feeds into that shadow work and that men's work that you're
Hmm.
quite keen on, that depth.
Yeah, for sure. Um, yeah, that's all happened since about 2010. My kind of connection with men's work. Do you want me to say a little bit about that just now?
I'd love to hear a bit about that.
Um, yeah, so I was approaching 40 in about 2010. I'm feeling really uneasy about the whole thing of being male and like what masculinity is. This was before even Me Too and stuff, but it didn't feel to me like men were doing very well as men. Either mental health wise in ourselves or in kind of what we were doing in the world. And but I met this very inspirational guy called David who was talking about male rites of passage. I've been doing a bit of reading around like what is it that's kind of men need to grow up and be really fully involved in the world and to be doing good. And there was this kind of weird sounding weekend in the Highlands that he said, oh, come along and find out. And it was a kind of modern rites of passage, which all societies have done right through time, to kind of grow up their men. And it just totally changed me. I mean, I went from being a little bit ashamed of being a man to kind of meeting some really lovely, wonderful men who were just aware of their shit and their shadow and working on it and holding it out in front of them so they didn't cause any damage with it, but also joyous guys that was totally alive, and I'm feeling goosebumps just talking about it. But it was weird, and I can't tell you much about it because the whole point of a rite of passage is a little bit sort of private. But I haven't really looked back since then, and I've got some really good close male friends. And instead of doing that pub talk thing of talking past each other or that thing that leaves you feeling empty after a night of kind of connection, it's like, hey, what are you feeling and where are you feeling it? And straight in there, and yeah, I feel very, very close to. I've got some really good male friends, who I could phone in the middle of the night in an emergency, whereas I had nobody like that before. I don't think. Well, family maybe. Yeah.
Mm.
Oh, yeah. So
Yeah, and I'll just quote you actually, because there was something in your blog, or I think maybe it was your bio that stood out to me. I particularly relish the growth and liberation that comes with men when men risk emotional connection, enhancing our relationships to the women and children in our lives. Is
yeah.
that the essence of the men's work you do?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, it's not kind of it's not the sort of the alt-right. It's nowhere near the kind of alt-right sort of stuff that's coming up recently around masculinity. It's very much integrative, generative, loving our partners, loving our children, and as I say, being aware of shadow. I mean, that's really where I first heard the term shadow was among these men, because we do a lot of harm in the world, right? As well. I mean, all humans do on some level, but men particularly, we seem to have had, hundreds of years of domination where we haven't acquitted ourselves very well, and to be able to kind of be brave enough to go deep and see, what's causing that, and to hold out in front of us, and to show each other, hey, this is who I am, as well as this light part of me, but also this deep shadow that I keep tripping over. That's a connecting thing, it gets past shame and into kind of, oh wow, it's not just me. And yes, that did have an effect on the people in your life, and what are you going to do about it? So it's kind of holding each other accountable as well for how we show up. Yeah. It's good
Mhm.
stuff. I mean, so every week or two, I go and circle up with some guys, and we sort of talk really seriously about how we've been showing up in the world. We also there's a lot of laughter and joy as well, but quite serious stuff of what needs to change. Where haven't we been showing up? But very accepting, and of course confidential, which is that safe container that from which to grow. That I think I've discovered I need to sort of place to stand.
Mhm. And would you say men's work and shadow work and navigation and drift is at the heart of your practice, or am I bringing in my, assumptions about
It's
reading your
interesting.
bio?
It's definitely in the heart of my personal journey. But one of the things I've been thinking about is how my coaching is in some ways staggered slightly behind, or it's a slightly more cautious version of who I am in my coaching, and that may change in coming weeks and months. But so I don't do a lot of the really full-on processing work that I would do in my personal life in kind of men's circles. Is kind of quite scary to some clients, and so I deliberately I follow a fairly pure coaching model. I hold space. I follow the client, very Animas kind of focused stuff. I do love the kind of Gestalt based stuff like empty chair work. I love parts work. Probably where shadow comes into my coaching most is this acknowledgement that we're all a collection of parts, or we could see ourselves as a collection of parts, and all of those parts are needed, even the ones we would really rather weren't there. And that's because that's been a part of my own personal journey. I'm really passionate about encouraging whoever shows up in front of me to bring all of themselves, and how might all those parts be needed? And including the shadow parts, which are the ones that we repress or deny or hate or want to cut off. Or yeah.
Mhm.
I could talk endlessly, Brent, as you're probably discovering. So do jump in if you want to kind of wrestle it in a different direction, or it's all welcome.
Well, it's interesting because we could probably talk for an hour just about men's work or just about shadow work. So to cover the ground, for sure, we'll move on, but maybe we'll revisit that
Yeah,
another
it'll
time.
resurface as thematically, I'm sure. Yeah.
Mhm. So who do you coach then? I've heard about the kind of topics that you enjoy, and where you see yourself theoretically, but who are your clients?
It's so interesting. I kind of coach anybody. I have a slightly higher proportion of men to women than other coaches might, perhaps because I've done that men's work. I think also because on my website I've got a phrase that many of my clients have come back to me and said, "Oh, you said that you've been personally and professionally stuck," and that was such a relief to hear it's not just me. So my clients are often stuck or lost or feel lost in some way. They're all in some kind of transition, often midlife transition. Some of them have followed the kind of road of tremendous effort to success and have found it a bit empty, and are kind of really disorientated by that. Of like, wow, I made my six-figure salary, and what does it mean? And then others had this idea but haven't managed to, and are feeling a failure, or kind of like it's the end of the road, or they're kind of hitting their 50s and like, what's next? And with all of them, I guess, in common, we just look at this kind of map that they've got of their life, and quite often what looks like a dead end turns out to be a doorway into a different life. This whole Jungian idea of the second half of life being very different from the first half, and often about service rather than kind of achievement. So it's often existential, or kind of that would be a common theme. There's a lot of kind of more sort of artistic people come, because I'm very comfortable with kind of creative process. What else? And I actually, just in recent years, I've kind of intentionally drifted into education work. Not that I'm educating, but people in education. So these are kind of contracts sort of that have been running over a few years now and repeating with senior academics in UK and Scottish universities, where it's amazing. I mean, they're all on leadership programs and looking at their research and kind of getting out of the box, and just the sheer breadth of stuff that they explore, whether it's archaeology or AI or urban planning, or it's amazing privilege to kind of hear that they all have the same issues we all do as well. There's too much coming in, how to say no, prioritization, all of that kind of bread and butter coaching stuff. But often also there's this underlying existential bit. Do I even want to be here? Like, is this meaningful work? So I love that. And I'm also doing a lot of work with head teachers in England and in a lot of different schools. I've just got massive respect for this kind of work of education, which, you know, what could be more important, both at the beginning with primary school heads, and sort of getting our kids really interested in the world, or, you know, higher education, how do we kind of start to influence policy and get out of our silos and straddle kind of different subjects. And I mean, but neither of those were things I thought, I want to get into education. Where should I go? They were all kind of, somebody would kindly say, Nick, there's an opportunity coming. I thought of you. Fancy it? And I'm like, yeah, why not? And so I seem to be there. And if I'd been going, right, no, I need to work with parents or whatever, then I might have missed that. So I'm kind of starting to trust that what drifts under my nose sometimes is exactly what I need, or exactly what needs to happen. So yeah, we're a kind of different range of different clients there.
But there's definitely that theme of drift there. And what also I picked up on was, you know, when I was listening to you speak, it was just, I always hear the same things, that like seems to attract like. And you were talking about midlife transitions and creative process and working with men or dads. And when you spoke about working with people in education, my impression of you is you're quite studious. You've written a few books, you've done a TEDx talk, and I imagine that appeals to people in higher education. I don't know if that's true or not, but would you say it's fair to say like attracts like, even though the ultimate irony of coaching is we don't have to be an expert and we don't have to know anything or be like the person we're coaching. However, for some reason, people do get to similarities.
That's a good question. Because I've never worked in education. Well, actually, I've been to schools as a visiting author and stuff, but I've never been a teacher. And a lot of the coaches who teach on these programs have kind of done the actual career. So in some ways, people seem to pick me as a coach because I'm different. So I'm outside of their kind of, you know, what do you call it? Sort of echo chamber of education, and can come in with different metaphors and different ideas. But you know, maybe it reassures them that I've written books. Maybe that whole thing of the idea of needing to publish something kind of appeals to academics. And you know, early in my career, early in my life, I was a massively driven, high-flying kind of academic-minded person, jumping through whatever hoops people gave me, and I went to Oxford and stuff, and maybe that stuff also reassures them. I don't know. Maybe it doesn't. I've never asked them. It's a good question.
I'd be interested. Yeah, why do people pick the coaches that they pick? And maybe it's navigation and drift as well, and people just arrive, just like you arrived at education.
That sort of left field need for something different coming into the space across the wall of the silo. You know, I don't know. I think that's so refreshing for us, isn't it? When somebody totally different comes in, or a bit different. But of course, as a coach, most of that sort of really under the surface, because I'm not bringing I'm not bringing all my experience other than kind of unconsciously. I'm not saying here's something I learned when I was traveling around the world or whatever. It's about the client. So it's quite interesting just to kind of put a lid on all that mostly. And if people come to me for coaching and they think I'm going to tell them sea shanties and kind of talk about my days in travel, they're kind of disappointed, because I don't. It's not about me. It's about them. That's a sort of relief, actually, in some ways as well.
Yeah, and that sort of reminds me of something you said before in a brief chat we had, where you spoke about, you know, listening and reflecting being a lifetime's piece of work and development for you as a coach. Yeah,
it's so rare, isn't it, to kind of to kind of listen properly. I mean, coaching for me is listening. I mean, and it seems so simple when you're trying to explain to people what coaching is. Well, it's just really good listening. they don't really get it. But after an hour of being intently listened to, I mean, it's such an experience for people. I mean, that's why I went into coaching, actually. Or one of the reasons, because when I was doing another bit of intentional drifting, I worked for a time as a head of comms for a little charity that this friend who'd also got me into men's work had set up, and I discovered there how much I dislike social media and kind of that whole slice and dice kind of massive spread of stuff coming at me, and every day I'd kind of have to kind of be sending out loads of tweets and hashtags and stuff, and I'd be sitting in conferences about fatherhood, because this was a fathering charity that I was working for, kind of encouraging dads to be more emotionally connected. But I'd be sitting in these conferences and people would be on their phones in front of these amazing inspirational teachers, kind of putting in hashtag inspirational and stuff, because I told them to, because I was the one who put the slide up saying, hey, do tweet about it. And a bit of me was thinking, what are we doing? There's just put your phone away and listen. Like, why, what is this thing we've got to be feeding back into this? Anyway, so you can hear that I find it a bit overwhelming. But at that same time, I was doing my Animas training, and I'd go from that job, from kind of absolute mind overload of being tweeted to death from all directions, into this amazing space with a client where we just talk, or he'd talk actually, and I'd listen for an hour, and he'd go through this whole journey of just expanding in front of me and finding surprising things about himself. And I think that contrast between those two worlds and the two ways of communicating and just makes me so passionate about what we can offer as coaches. My God, where else do you get to be listened to properly for an hour? Amazing. So yeah, that's one of the things I've discovered kind of since I came into coaching, really. Like, oh, this is what it is. Oh my God, this is incredible. Yeah.
Really interesting topic about the social media piece, because I'm sure there's lots of coaches out there that have similar thoughts about social media to you, but there's also this felt need, like we should be doing social media as it's part of the business. But you're someone that has not really gone down that road then.
No, I mean, yeah, I mean, it's so countercultural for doing a business that I sometimes feel a bit ashamed of it. I mean, I'm sure Nick Bolton would be like, is kind of like, what are you doing, Nick? Get out there on social media. But it's a different quality of living for me to have to kind of keep picking up these little ends of things and responding. And I do think it's amazing. It's got amazing advantages as well. I think I'm probably talking about my introvert tendency and my need for space, and I just get overwhelmed by it. So I'm not out there on social media really. I did a bit around the time I was publishing books. I didn't hate it. I mean, it's nice to kind of sometimes interact with people and kind of feedback, and I may venture back into that a little bit, but I think we're going to look back and kind of go, what did we do to our brains in this era? In terms of our ability to go deep rather than wide. But if you like that sort of thing, then it's probably a really good way of getting clients. So. But I'm lucky. For some reason, I haven't needed to do that much, in terms of marketing and traditional ways of marketing. People seem to come to me from. I'm in a life coaching directory, which seems to bring me a regular flow of people. There's a lot of kind of word of mouth thing that comes from being an Animas trainer. I love training. Again, another thing I would never have discovered if I hadn't just tried it. But I love that mix of kind of being able to be myself, but also delivering material that I'm passionate about. So I'm not quite sure where all my clients come from. So that's not a great answer, is it, to kind of how do you get clients? But I'm just very grateful that I get enough. I haven't got masses of clients. I mean, I've done a lot of coaching in the 5 or 6 years since I did Animas, about 1,000 hours now. But I've just watched who've come in and accepted them, and I have got these two stable kind of Yeah. So from a kind of from a place of pragmatism, I've got sort of more than one leg to my stool. So I have Animas, I have my private practice, I have a company that feeds me uh, senior academics. I have a company that feeds me head teachers, and I have supervision, and I have a bit of coach mentoring. So actually, I've been freelance for 25 years in various ways, and so I'm very comfortable with that. And I know that I have to have lots of little sort of streams coming in so as not to risk losing everything if one of them goes belly up.
Mm-hmm.
I keep screeching around corners here, Princeton, going into whole new subjects. You're going to have to
Great, because you're
rest the
asking a lot
steering wheel
more.
if you need to.
Oh, no, no, all good. It's yours. You're answering a lot of questions organically that were going to come up anyways. You know, what's the portfolio of your business and what does it look like? And this is something I hear, you know, quite a lot from experienced coaches, having this portfolio of work, whether, like you say, it's training, mentoring, supervision, coaching, being an associate coach. But this wasn't there at the start, was it? This is something that's been built over time. And let's start at the beginning briefly, and we'll just do a little brief potted history in terms of what did you do before Animas, and
Yeah.
when did you train, and how long is it taking you to build a practice to where it is now?
Okay. So my first career was journalism. And I had my first job on the Edinburgh Evening News. I'm in Edinburgh, and that's what brought me to Edinburgh from London, where I was from. I worked my way through for 6 years as a staff writer for the Evening News, and then the Scotsman, which is a great newspaper, and sent me all over the place. And then I left and went traveling to South America, but on a retainer, and sent loads of stuff back to them. So I built a kind of freelance portfolio as a journalist, wrote for all the broadsheets, did stuff for radio, and just had an amazing time of kind of asking people all over the world, what makes you tick? You know, who are you in the world, and what can I learn, and how's life been for you? I mean, just an amazing privilege to be able to just go and talk to people about life, you know. So that's a kind of common theme, I think, asking questions, and holding space for other people's stories. And so I did that through. So in about 2000 in South America, I got this amazing opportunity, again, drifted under my nose. I was on a bus and overheard a conversation about a voyage to Easter Island that somebody was running on a kind of not prehistoric, but kind of a reed boat built in a kind of very ancient way with no kind of modern materials. And originally I thought I was just going to send it as a feature. And I actually got involved in the voyage and got a place on the voyage, and ended up navigating to Easter Island from Chile on this kind of incredible thing made out of, you know, reeds bundled together. And that became an opportunity for a book, because I was sending back bulletins to the Scotsman every week, kind of doing travel columns and all sorts of stuff. And I got approached by an agent who said, "Hey, have you thought about writing a book?" Which I had, and that was a kind of opportunity. So I wrote this book called 8 Men and a Duck about this crazy voyage that I was on, which, you know, we weren't really equipped to sail 2,500 miles across the Pacific, but we did. And it was amazing, incredible opportunity. And from then on in, I just carried on freelance travel writing in order to fund kind of travel around the place. I was based in Edinburgh, had an idea I wanted to get to know Scotland better. So I hitched on other people's boats around Scotland for my second book, learned a huge amount about my adoptive country, and then became a dad, and an adoptive dad, aged about 38, 39. That was a whole other adventure, and that kind of rooted me down into Edinburgh. Stopped traveling so much, really kind of got to learn a lot about sort of early development, child development stuff, and got even more interested in psychology and so on. Thought I might be a counsellor at one point, did a year of training in process-oriented psychology, loved that, but actually it was going to take years to become a counsellor. So I decided not to do that, and we needed to homeschool our son at that point for various reasons. So I needed to get a proper job. That's when I came into, just for a while, into this part-time work, working for Fathers Network Scotland, which was this campaigning organisation working with the Scottish government to kind of to promote gender equality in terms of actually us men stepping up and doing our part as fathers, rather than being the kind of traditional off out of the picture while women do the work. So that got me to I don't know, what was that, about 2016, where I was running this thing called Year of the Dad in Scotland with the Scottish government. And I just talked to a friend about Animas. I'm missing a big bit out here, but it's a big story. So because the other thing that happened was I kind of burnt out. So while I was writing the second of my 3 books, I was using my staple willpower to kind of get stuff done. And with a kind of very strong inner critic going, come on, get this manuscript in. That was my default, was to kind of push myself all the time and sort of force myself to do stuff and achieve stuff. And I burnt out. I couldn't actually finish the book on time. I had to kind of send a humiliating sorry. I need some rest. Went to see a life coach, and the life coach said, wondered, as life coaches do, have you ever considered thanking that really fierce part of you, that inner critic, that inner boss, that's kind of that slave driver you're talking about? Thank him for what he's trying to do. A little bit of leading there, maybe. I don't know if she'd have passed her ICF exam on that, but it really helped me. Although I was kind of, I'm telling you about this part of me that's making my life a misery. I just want to get rid of it, just hack it off. And she said, well, just you might want to just try that. And I did, and noticed the volume of kind of inner war drop. And then over kind of coming months, as I kind of kicked back and gave myself a bit of a break, thought, what if life is not a kind of war between parts of myself that want to achieve different things? What if I'm not in a battle between Mr. Achiever, who gets books written, and Mr. Lazy Git, who doesn't? What if everybody's trying to contribute something? And that has stayed with me ever since, actually. I was very religious as a child, as a teenager as well. And this kind of possibility of unconditional positive regard, that everyone's doing their best, including all of my different parts are all trying to help, that was a game changer. So at the point when I was working for the NGO, I started thinking about what could I do beyond this. I wasn't that keen on the kind of comms part of it, and Animas was just setting up in Edinburgh as a kind of in-person. It was like the first cohort for Animas in Edinburgh in a time when we didn't do it all on Zoom. And it was just one of those things where I actively searched for it and found it and thought, that sounds good. And I went down to London deliberately to go and meet Nick Bolton and just check him out. Took my books and showed him that. He was going, oh wow, okay. And went on the course. Met some amazing people. Only a few of us on that course, but and pretty soon afterwards began training to train, because I loved it so much. And that's kind of how that evolved. And my private practice, as I say, just kind of grew organically, really, rather than with any particular plan. Although I have a number of tools everyone will have heard of that I use, like everyone else, Calendly and stuff, and so I can tell you about those if you want to. But I basically watched it grow, and it's taken me since 2017. So what's that? Nearly 6 years to get where I am. I've got my PCC with the ICF, became a supervisor. It's sort of one of those flow things, it just seemed to kind of grow and grow. And I was in a flow. I was going with the current. A lot of it just came again up, and I followed it. So it wasn't the, furious efforting that I was used to. So that also makes me think it's the right direction. I'm doing a lot of talking here, Brinsley. I'll stop there, though.
You mentioned about furious efforting, which was interesting to me, because you said something like, well, that makes me think it's probably the right thing then, because you weren't furiously efforting.
Yeah.
Can you expand on that a bit more?
Yeah, totally. So I'm really excited at the minute about a new idea I've had, or some ideas have come together, which may ironically turn out to be my nearest thing I've got to a business plan. But there's a kind of realization in me that sort of active effort is usually the default for us in the coaching, and actually in Western world. I mean, perpetual growth, and both personal perpetual growth and also economic perpetual growth has kind of not done as great service, certainly not the planet, right? So the whole problem is that we're just efforting. Okay, the next thing, we can always be growing. And what I'm realizing is partly because I've not done that for some of my life, and it's been really rich as a result, but also because we spend a third of our life asleep, for goodness sake, and also nature doesn't furiously effort all year. It's got a kind of beautiful burst of spring, and then some summer, and then we're into loss of autumn and leaves falling off, and then we're into frozenness and stasis in winter. And so I've got this idea of this kind of matrix, which kind of is like effort on one side, and kind of drift on the other, if you like, or so active and passive. And then the sort of the other axis is kind of conscious and subconscious or unconscious. And this idea that it's okay to be in drift, like drift is needed. And the stuff that often my clients come to me feeling of like, oh, I'm just adrift. It's a bit of me going, great, yeah, this is where you may discover stuff. And the really exciting bit for me is the idea of intentional drift, conscious drift. And when I was traveling around Scotland, I kind of heard about these 6th century monks who was like seafaring monks, and they were called Peregrini. And the idea was that they pushed off sort of from Ireland. They're Irish monks. They pushed off in these boats made of skin and kind of animal skin with branches and coracles, basically. And they trusted God to take them somehow to their place of resurrection. So they were kind of consciously scanning the horizon. They weren't particularly sailing in any direction. They were seeing where the wind and the weather took them, where currents took them. And they floated across from Ireland. And the most famous one, St. Columba, ended up on Iona, which became a kind of center for kind of religious revival. They built a big abbey there. And I'm no longer particularly tied to that particular spiritual tradition, but it seems to me that the trust that required for them to kind of push off from the shore, and trust that actually there's something kind of intelligent about conscious drifting. It's like the kind of envisioning process, that moment in any company where we need to kind of step back and dream a bit and take a foot off the accelerator, for example, in corporate life. But also that the other thing I love about it is that the sort of unconscious drift is also so rich. If it on one level, we have kind of complete burnout, so that's where we're kind of drifting almost in sleep because we need to recover. But if you think about dreams and sort of how much comes up in our sleep from our subconscious that we can really work with, I've got really interested in dream work and Jungian stuff like that, then that's also a great resource. So even the stuff that's under the surface of the water, bottom of the iceberg stuff, is incredibly rich too. So again, to encourage clients who are in a place of burnout, that this can be a very generative moment for you, and to sort of help, if they want, to kind of start taking notice of what's coming up in dreams. I'm really interested in shamanic process at the minute, and kind of shamanic journeying, which is a kind of daytime version of dreaming, where we kind of trust our subconscious to do some work under the surface and bring us where we go next. So I'm really excited about this this other side of the matrix, as it were, from the usual. It's usually either kind of furious effort, like salmon. Salmon spend most of their life swimming around happily, and then for this one period they do this salmon run where they kind of go upstream, furiously pushing against the flow, jumping over waterfalls to kind of spawn and die at the top of the waterfall. Whereas that seems to be kind of, particularly in the sort of US led world, that's what we should all be aiming at all the time. Push, 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 create, produce, more stuff, more, sleeps for the dead or whatever. And I think that it's out of balance, both in personally, and kind of how we run our lives, but also obviously internationally and kind of globally. We can't keep living like that. And it's a really amazing time to be thinking about that sort of restoring that balance, given the clock's ticking on the planet, right? So as you can tell, I've kind of got a lot going on at the minute, and I've kind of come up accidentally with this sort of business model, or at least a coaching model, actually, something like the kind of navigate drift matrix or something like that, which I'm really excited might be kind of use to clients, certainly helping me. And the ones I've tried it out on sort of as guinea pigs are like, oh my God, send me the matrix. So that's really increasing my trust that I haven't just been faffing around for the last 5 or 6 years, not doing a business plan. Some things organically been coming to me, and you kind of catch me on the cusp of it really coming to life. So yeah. Another enormous spiel.
No, it was great. I loved what you shared, and it was interesting to hear all the questions popping up in my head and me having to park them as new content came up. And I was like, oh, this is interesting. But yeah, I totally resonate with that distinction between that muscular action versus being in flow and being in drift.
Yeah.
And I loved how you kind of put it together in that matrix with all the different quadrants. You said it's a coaching model, but what I also kind of heard, or maybe attributed it to, is that it feels like it's been your business model, maybe unconsciously at the tip of the iceberg, and now it's coming up to the fore. If you were to describe your...
Well, yeah, I think it's realizing that I've been exploring drift through my journalistic career for 25 years, so whether I was navigating across the Humboldt Current in this kind of straw boat in order to get, so I was kind of trying to cross the drift in a way to get to Easter Island, or whether I was like seeing who would pick me up in a boat, leave it to synchronicity whilst going around Scotland, or the one that I wrote last after my burnout was like, what would it be like to let go? And so I wrote a whole book on the lost art of letting go, I called it, and sort of went to all sorts of places and spoke to people who had kind of taken their hands off the handlebars, whether it was kind of I don't know, extreme sports people, or naturists, or monks, or I mean just a whole load of different people who blew my mind collectively. And so again, conscious drift. So the other thing that's helped me with is this kind of sense of having these two halves of my working life, like how do they fit together? But actually, this particular enthusiasm I've got at the minute fits in really well with that, and kind of encouraging clients who really need to let go. I mean, I obviously help the ones who also want to do the salmon run as well, because we've all got to do that sometimes. But it feels like two kind of halves of my life kind of going, so yeah, I'm excited.
As a coach listening to this and thinking about other coaches listening to this, a question I've got for you, maybe play a bit of devil's advocate here. How do we know when we're drifting and when we're procrastinating on building our business and developing? What's your answer to that?
Well, I do a lot of that as well. So that's the shadow. That's the shadow realm as kind of unconscious drift. Also includes a kind of avoidant kind of element. So I know, for example, that I don't do enough backroom work on kind of audit, keeping on top of my clients, knowing what session they're on and so on. All of that kind of nuts and bolts of a business. So I'm currently getting some help with that. But that is for sure avoidant behavior on my part, because I don't enjoy it as much as the rest of my business. So you can drift in that way unconsciously, and but being willing to kind of look at it and go, is this procrastination, or is this generative envisioning time, like, should I be at my desk kind of typing stuff, or should I be out in my kayak looking at the horizon, seeing what comes up? And like loads of my best ideas come up when I'm swimming at the gym or something, or doing something that isn't work. So it definitely can be procrastination. Yeah. And I'm looking a lot of my shadow there, particularly when I drop the ball in a ways that isn't good for a client, and having to repair that if I've somehow forgotten an appointment or something, or so there is a shadow there for me. Does that answer your question?
It does. Yeah. And we could keep unpacking and unpacking, but there's something you said about being in the kayak and having ideas, which made me think of, a stat around how people have a lot of their best ideas in the shower. Not when we're at the desk thinking we need to think, we need to do.
Yeah.
Which kind of speaks to this whole flow that you've been in, this drift, if you like.
Actually, there's around writing. It's funny. So I did my third book, and I tried to write a fourth, which was a novel, and I got stuck, and I never finished it. And I haven't written really publicly much since. So like 10 to 15 years have gone by as I've been focused on parenting, and I've been becoming a coach and stuff. Been writing furiously in my journal. Not furiously, I've been writing in my journal, and but I haven't been facing anything outwards. And funnily enough, in one of the modules that I train, the successive cohorts of coaches have been coaching me as part of Clean Language on, writer's block, and kind of why aren't I writing stuff out there? Why am I not really even doing more than the occasional blog? What's going on there? And and I've kind of done the usual self-critique of, is it just perfectionism? Is it just that surely I should be right? How selfish, I'm just writing. And successive cohorts have kind of coached me on it, and I've come up with different images and stuff. But really, what's coming up for me now is like, I'm really starting to trust that it just wasn't the right time to write stuff. And I'm really feeling it bubbling up now. I feel like, so any day, there's something coming. But what would it be like just to trust that, okay, I clearly didn't want to write enough to write, because I didn't. So that's fine, and so I'll just trust that. And I've done all the interventions on myself, had people, accountability buddies and stuff. And there was clearly a part of me that's like, no, I don't want to write anymore. I'm not, we'll see if it comes later, but don't want to do that for now. There's plenty of other stuff to do. I don't know, it'd be interesting if I do kind of come back into the writing saddle, as it were, and kind of start sharing a bit more outward facing stuff. Will I look back and go, you were so avoidant there, Nick? Or will I go, yeah, it was about the right time. Good. Let's go. I don't know. But I know which one makes me feel better. So I'm not sure. As long as I follow the flow, maybe it doesn't matter which it was.
Yeah, and this is an interesting topic when it comes to building a business, a coaching business, and developing ourselves, and in what areas we focus on, that avoidance, that procrastination, that flow, or that navigation.
Yeah. And as I said, I've really kind of, I've really sought support and help in the last few months, in particular, around that. And I'm kind of excited about, like, when I first went to Calendly, I thought, what an amazing tool. None of this back and forth with email. And I'm now starting to think I'm going to go to a kind of one of these client management systems in the next few days, even just to kind of start being more on top of things, so that I can relax and not accidentally drop the ball sometimes, and just think, okay, I'm on it. Now I can focus on the client. That's what I want. That's what we all want to do, right? None of us really enjoys invoicing and stuff. So I think there's been some procrastination there, Brinsley. Absolutely. And avoidance. I hands up to that. Yeah.
And when you look back at your business building journey, because I know meaningful risk and emotional risk is quite a big topic for you from listening to your TED Talks, and knowing that you've done plane walking and naturism and all sorts of interesting sales. What meaningful risk have you taken? What stands out for you in that business building journey of becoming a coach?
actually, what comes up at the minute, Brinsley, is not what risk I've taken in my coaching journey, but part of the reason I haven't been very outward, I think, in my writing is that I've been doing a very difficult thing in my personal life, taking a risk of separating from a very long-standing, beloved relationship and trying to change the nature of that in a way that's kind of amicable. It's still a bit private to talk about here, but it's like if talking about the salmon run, I mean, it's like that feels like I've spent the last 5 to 10 years kind of really working hard personally on things that needed to change, and exploring things that feel a little bit tender and kind of difficult to talk about. And so that's been the biggest risk I've taken, I think, recently. And also becoming a dad, there's a kind of, I wouldn't say it's a risk, it's the richest but hardest thing I'd ever done, I think, when I first became a dad. And so those two things feel like very, very big emotional, personal risks. And I think I'm about to take a risk in my coaching now, with where I'm going, but it doesn't feel like it could have been possible alongside all of that until now. So in a way, my coaching has been my safe container that I've been building from which to have a life in which I have enough money, and I've been spreading my risk in the way I said earlier with kind of different income streams. And I have a feeling that the big risk I'm about to take is going to be bringing the stuff that's really enlivened my personal journey, slightly more off the grid stuff, slowly into my coaching.
What is that risk?
Sorry?
What is that risk?
Well, that's, that it's a bit too much, or it's people find it a little bit hippie or woo-woo, or I am, it's it unearths big emotions in clients, or what's the risk that I can't support them enough, or I'm creating an unsafe container. All of those things are what stops me from taking those risks with clients. And I think professionally, I have a duty not to take too big a risk with clients, because they're trusting me to hold a safe space for them. But I think I could be taking incremental risks there, which I haven't yet fully done. And yeah, that excites me, and it also makes me feel quite kind of serious all of a sudden, like, yeah. So we'll see what happens. We'll see if my business changes. So I don't really need it. I don't really want any more clients particularly, but I might start to quite enjoy having different kinds of clients. Yeah, we'll see.
Are we talking about the shamanic process work, the shadow work?
Yeah.
And you say that meaningful risk and sort of slightly
somatic work as well. I've been trying to kind of get myself a bit more trauma aware, because that's always the danger when we go into the full kind of body realm of kind of more facilitated coaching and so on. But yeah, it's that stuff I do myself in men's circles, and is full on and is incredibly growth promoting, and is meticulously contracted for. And there's lots of shadow watchers in the circle who will check, call you on stuff. And to bring that stuff one-to-one, I think requires a really safe, a safety harness of kind of integrity and personal kind of, I need to be watching my shadow and all the time, but I also need to trust myself. And I think I'm getting to the stage where I could do that. But I think that's why it's slightly behind where I'm at in my personal life.
Mm-hmm. What strikes me about this conversation and really resonates with me is that our personal life and our professional development can often be so intertwined, and the journey that we're on can often be reflected in how we show up as coaches or where we're at in our coaching business. Because the question I asked you was about the meaningful risk in your business building journey, but you instantly went to your personal life, and then I saw how that tied in with your business. So what do you say about this intertwining of the professional and personal journey that we're on as coaches, and how it shows up
I think it's always going to show up somehow, and I've got to be quite aware of it. Of what we've got to be willing to bracket when it's our stuff rather than the client's stuff. So it brings tremendous kind of empathy and so on if somebody shows up who is kind of in a similar space. And actually, weirdly, people do start to show up. My experience is that people show up with whom I've got some kind of affinity or connection through shared experience. And that's when I can offer them a lot, but I also have to be very careful how I offer it, and also that it's not me rather than them. So you're probably hearing some caution in me, Brinsley, and I think that's right. I think the safe container in which to take really meaningful risks is so important to me that I'm perhaps overcautious sometimes. I'm not afraid of emotion. I'm a very emotional man. I cry a lot. I'm kind of very in touch with my emotions, and I sometimes forget that for a client, to have a strong emotion come up can be really scary, and I have to keep remembering to kind of create that safety when that happens. But yeah, I'm feeling it's time. It's getting to be the time. Yeah.
Well, I'm excited to see how it develops.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you.
You mentioned becoming a dad.
Yeah.
I'm really fascinated by the topic of fatherhood, and how it impacts us as coaches. And I mentioned at the start of the conversation, I watched your TED talk, which I loved, and I was really moved when you were talking about becoming a father for the first time. How has being a dad impacted on you as being a coach?
Well, it makes, for one thing, it makes it impossible for me to pretend that I've got my shit sorted, because, as you'll know, children push exactly the right buttons to bring all your shadow up, and kind of all the stuff you thought was, I thought I was a really nice, mild-mannered guy until I, had my expert button pusher come on the scene. So it humbles you. It humbled me, kind of, I use a lot of examples from that period in TA, kind of parent-child, and the way it's so easy to kind of flip between them. It's brought a lot of empathy around early development, into, like how can our early lives not affect how we show up in the coaching space as clients or practitioners. So I really don't buy this thing of like coaching is all about the future, and any dabbling in the past, that must be counseling. Rubbish. I mean, I'm so kind of, how can it not be relevant? We're not going to go there and wallow in it or kind of stay there, but of course it's fine to bring up. Of course we bring the past in. So that's one of my beefs, as you can tell. So it's maybe very, very relaxed about helping clients to look at what's brought them to where they are, how they were parented, how that shows up for them, where they want to go with that, how they can be parents. Very empathic towards anybody going through parenting. I thought for a bit I was going to be a specialist coach of people who were adoptive parents, just because I thought, oh well, I'll know all about that because I am one. But actually, that was one of those danger things where I thought I knew what it was like, and it was too close as a niche, and I just went away from that. So I don't actually do that much coaching on certainly not on adoptive parenting. It comes up incidentally, and a fair number of dads come through and some mums, but it's coming sideways a bit. But it's totally changed who I am, so it can't not affect my coaching. And it also anchored me, as I said before, having been a kind of archetypal travel writer and journalist going all over the place, to kind of come down and notice where I live and why I love where I live, and that whole pre-lockdown thing, and then in lockdown suddenly, like, okay, you've got to be happy where you are. How can you do that? But funnily enough, my son's 18 next week, so it's a long time since I gave that talk when he was like a little 5-year-old, and it's been an amazing journey, and I couldn't be more proud of him. He's just really seeing his challenges and his journey, and how he's tackled those, and he's taught me. He's so different to me, and I've learned so much. I was a people-pleasing, hoop-jumping little academic swat. he's a kind of real rebel, and I really admire that. And in my later years, I've kind of come into that sort of that rebellious bit myself, and really loving it.
Great to hear. I was really nodding my head enthusiastically, as you saw when you were talking about the past and how it completely informs the now. And I really agree with that point. And I think often the new coach, and maybe rightly so, doesn't want to go into the past too often, but how can it not inform the here and now? So it's really nice to hear about you talk about that beef. And I was interested, and we haven't got so long to unpack this, but what's it like to hold that tension alongside being a PCC credential coach, being a trainer, and having the ICF core competencies, but then also having this other part of you that feels like it's coming together, this process work and the shamanic and the somatic work?
Yeah, well, I mean, nothing in ICF competencies and PCCs prevents bringing all of ourselves, I think. I mean, one of the great things about doing the PCC level qualification was I went from a slightly immature sort of view of the ICF as box ticking nonsense, and we all know it's like a driving test and you get to drive how you want after, so let's get it out of the way, to actually kind of a real respect for, of course you need a structure, of course you need to know where you're going, of course you need to check you've got there, and you can do all this lovely juicy stuff in the middle, but let's make sure that's about building a safe container, is the takeoff and the landing. So I don't feel any conflict there. In fact, I'm really grateful for the pure coaching container in which to bring any amount of really kind of somatic stuff, or kind of interesting. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Even saying that, I wasn't aware I felt like that, but that's true. That is, pure coaching has become a safe container. That kind of Claire Pedrick simplifying coaching thing, get out of the way of the client, has become a container from which to take risks with the client, or for them to take risks. It's not me. Yeah.
And would you find clients then saying, oh, you know what, I fancy doing a bit of somatic or process work or shadow or shamanic processes? Because that's the bit that doesn't feel like it's.
Yeah, it's rare. To be honest, it's rare, Brinsley. My clients are actually often quite cautious people, particularly the men. They're often very kind of outwardly conventional career types who are just a bit lost. So none of them would be up for that. So there's a question for me about, if I'm going to do it, how that move starts to happen. Once in a while, I'll get somebody who's really up for that. I think most people understand the idea of parts work, then kind of a part of me feels this and a part of me feels that, and I'm so confused. And so that's my kind of entry point into this work. But somatically, there's lots of clients I wouldn't go there with them unless I got a real sense that was something they wanted. I tried to do even just a perceptual positions empty chair thing with a head teacher the other week, and he really went for it, but he was really uncomfortable, and he said, "Oh, my wife will be really proud of me," but he came back the next week and didn't want to talk about it. So I'm just aware that actually the clients I'm seeing are often not that close to that territory that I'd really like to work in. And that is probably the question I need to ask myself is, we've got this bit stability, safety, the container to do the work. How are you going to get a few more of the clients that you could work with? So the minute it's a fairly sporadic encounter that happens. So that's where I need to start calling it in a bit and maybe tweaking my website copy and getting a bit of help. Yeah.
Getting help, asking for help, surrendering, accepting. That was something that came up when I listened, watched, read your stuff. So that's where you're at now then?
Yeah, I'm finally kind of going to people who know how to help me work out who my people might be, and seeing what work I can do with that. And as I start to introduce this conscious drift matrix idea sort of tentatively to some clients, I'm noticing some of them are kind of, that's fine, thanks. And others are, oh yeah, and they get really into it. And I think that might be my doorway into a slightly more joined up way of working. But yeah, I'm asking for help from, I've had a chat with a VA. I don't think I'm going to have an ongoing VA, but I think she might help me to kind of work out my online business a bit. as I say, gonna probably try out a client management system, because I want to feel better and more on top of how I serve my clients. I've got friends who are coaches, and I'm kind of asking their help, and they're holding space for me and I hold space for them, but peer support has been good. I'm doing a lot of writing. Oh yeah, and I've joined this kind of writing community, which a client mentioned to me actually, called London Writers Salon, where every day at 8 a.m. hundreds sometimes of writers just rock up on Zoom for like 50 minutes as accountability buddies and just write, sort of bookended by a kind of inspiring quote and a kind of how did it go, or what's your intention, and stuff like that. Is so helpful, just to have to diary in. Well, at least I know I'm going to do an hour's sort of shamanic download of writing each day. So yeah, asking for help, that's a bit of there's a bit of shadow there for me there. I'm very wary of kind of long-term collaborating, and I don't know why that is, so I'm exploring that. There's a kind of independent part of me that keeps wanting to kind of shake it all off and go and do my own thing, and that's shadow for me, and it's been quite interesting seeing how that doesn't serve me often, and how I need to kind of consciously be a bit braver and kind of say, what would it be like to keep going, commit myself to something. So you can ask me about that in future, Brinsley. I don't know how that's going to go.
Well, I'm excited to ask you about that in the future, and thank you for sharing that. It really sounds like you're on the cusp here of kind of the next step or next stage with your coach development.
Yeah, I hope so. Yeah.
If we were to look back along the last 6-7 years, building your business, what have you learned about yourself through the business building piece?
With the business building piece, that I absolutely love anything that automates the admin. So I don't know if I'm more than unusually impatient with admin, or if I'm just, everybody feels that, but anything that makes that into a kind of automated process, to me, is like a miracle. And just to let that carry the weight, whilst then caring for my clients in a kind of within the hour of the session. So I think what I learned about myself is I'm able to hold space really well and with real intensity and kind of focus, because I know it will end, or because I know it's for this hour, I can be there for you. And that makes a lot of sense to me as an introvert, as to why coaching suits me so well. And I need to be a little bit careful that doesn't seem a bit kind of, oh, well, that's the hour done. I'll move on. But there's a sense of kind of ongoing, across a number of sessions. So again, that's something I'm working on at the moment. Yeah.
And what advice would you give to yourself when you were starting out on this journey of building the coaching business?
Trust yourself. Trust yourself, but also know your shadow, which is kind of what I've done, actually. But yeah, I think the sort of backing myself and not abandoning myself when I slip up is really key. Staying on my own side and kind of trusting that I'm doing the best I can with what I've got. That whole unconditional positive regard thing. Yeah. I think, yeah, that'd be it.
Thank you, Nick. Any books that are seminal to you and your coach development or business development?
Well, I mentioned Simplifying Coaching. I love that. In terms of kind of non-fiction, I think that's a brilliant book. You could almost just have that in a way. I just bought a book yesterday, actually, though, about Gestalt coaching, which is really interesting to me because of something called the book's called The Fertile Void. And that in itself feels like conscious drift. And also I think, oh, hang on, empty chair work is Gestalt. Maybe Gestalt is something I need to look into. So I haven't read it. So another book that speaks to that is called The Path of Least Resistance by Robert Fritz, about creative process. And that is blowing my mind not a very well-known book, but you know, about trying to do as little of the salmon uphill run as possible and just tilting the landscape so that you flow. It's kind of the Tao, really. Taoist. Oh, and the Tao Te Ching. I keep reading that and going, how would this apply to business? But, you know, getting out of your own way, paradox, not trying too hard, all of that stuff. I love that. That kind of, that sort of poetic economy that you have in the Tao Te Ching. There's probably loads more, actually, but that'll do for now, right?
There's some great suggestions in there. Thank you. I've really enjoyed the chat and being on this kind of drift in different tangents. Thank you for sharing some time with me. In terms of forward motion, you know, where can people find you moving forward?
Oh, well, just go to my website, which is nickthorpe.co.uk. Yeah, you'll find me there. And I've got a LinkedIn page, but other than that, social media is not such a great place to find me for reasons we've covered. But yeah, that's where I am.
Yeah,
thanks so much, Brinsley. I really enjoyed talking to you a lot. Thank you.
Likewise. Yeah, me too. And yeah, we'll put the TED Talk that was referenced in the description notes as well if anyone wants to catch that.
Sure, yeah, that'd be great. Thank you.
Nice one, Nick. All the best.
All right. Take care, Brinsley.